Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Steven Gardner. He is here to celebrate Jabberwocky, love lessons from a boy who never spoke. Hey, Dr. Steve, how are you?
Just right, Ted. Thank you for having me on.
Really excited to have you on. Typically we're sharing books that families can read together. A lot of these books that we feature are books that families can read together, snuggled up on the couch with their little ones. We also love to introduce families to books that they would want to sit down and read with their older kids. And I think Jabberwocky absolutely falls into that category. I think there's a lot of lessons here for young people, young adults to learn, and a lot of lessons for parents to learn from. So why don't we start by asking you to tell us a little bit about Jabberwocky and the incredible person it is based on.
So Jabberwocky, as many of your listeners know, is a nonsense poem by Lewis Carroll. So from the 1800s, it was a poem that was filled with silly words, nonsense words like bandersnatch, gyre and gimble, jub tree. And when a woman named Helen Lamb founded a summer camp for kids with disabilities back in 1953 on Martha's Vineyard, for some reason she decided to name the camp Jabberwocky. And all the cabins carry those names like Mama Rats, Slivy Toes, Outgrade, Jub. That camp was a place where hope flourishes. And it was the first place, or one of the first places, where kids like our son, kids with serious disabilities, could go and really enjoy summer at the seashore with all the trimmings, meaning cookouts, riding a horse, getting thrown in the cold water of the Atlantic Ocean. So our boy was born with cerebral palsy, and he was affected quite severely by it, meaning he couldn't speak, he couldn't walk, he couldn't feed himself. He relied on us for absolutely everything. And so discovering Jabberwocky was kind of a magical moment in his childhood and in our lives. His mom and I became volunteers there. His mom cooked, and I became one of the camp doctors. So we sort of rode his coattails into this magical place in which all people, whatever their abilities are, whatever their disabilities are embraced into one community, one family of equals. And in that place, besides supporting one another dramatically and loving one another, there's also an abundance of silliness and laughter. And it turns out that silliness and laughter are very, very therapeutic. So we had this boy who went down there at age 10. He and I spent 13 fantastic summers there during the rest of his lifetime. And then after he passed away, I decided to keep going back as one of the camp doctors. So this will be my 25th summer at Jabberwocky.
That's beautiful. Folks may not know that in 1953, when Jabberwocky was founded, it really was trailblazing because now that was slightly before my time, but I was very much aware of the fact that in 1953, kids, people with severe disabilities were warehoused.
It was absolutely true. So the woman that founded camp, an extraordinarily determined person named Helen Lamb, was a speech therapist down in Fall River. And she realized that the kids that she was helping with speech essentially languished in the darkened parlors of their families' homes all summer. They never saw the light of day. They never got to the beach. They never did much of anything. And it annoyed the heck out of her. It made her angry. And she made a resolution that she was going to do something about it. So in that first summer, that summer of 1953, long before it was politically correct, she took 3 kids in wheelchairs on the ferry over to Oak Bluffs and started Camp Jabberwocky. And the rest is sort of history, 68 years later.
It's beautiful.
But you're quite right. She was very much a pioneer.
Yeah.
It was not something that was normally done in those days.
And even though we've come as a society and the way we looked at folks with disabilities, even though we've come a long way, I still think we have a long way to go. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm really excited to have you on to speak about Jabberwocky, because I think that this is, again, if this is a book that a family reads together or experiences as an audiobook together, I think it's a great way to open up people's eyes to the fact that people with disabilities are people, and they can become a great friend.
Indeed. And we can learn enormous lessons from them. At Camp Jabberwocky, we have campers and we have volunteers. The volunteers are counselors, but they might also be cooks or doctors or nurses. But in that environment, we do not think of ourselves as sort of a dichotomy of people who help and people who need help. We think of ourselves as one community in which people do whatever they can to assist the other people in the community. There are people like our son who can't talk, who can't walk, but they might inspire the community in other ways by making them laugh or by just inspiring them spiritually in some way. Inevitably, when we leave, those of us who are volunteers, every one of us says the same thing, and that is that we are absolutely sure we got more out of the experience than we gave to the experience. And that's been true forever, since the beginning.
Yeah. Is there a way that, we are, I guess we're trained, we're socialized to look at someone and I guess first see their needs. What can't this person do? Is there a way for us to reverse that so that we're first looking at what can this person give to me? What can I learn from this person?
That's a great question, Judd. I think, first of all, just observing people with disabilities, seeing them in the workplace, seeing them on public transportation, seeing them in our communities allows us to recognize that there's nothing to be afraid of, right? And so if we grow up in an environment, if we grow up in a culture where those people are part of everything, there's no need to really think of them as being all that different. At Jabberwocky especially, the more different they are, the better. And, we've seen sort of counselors in training, let's say, who are 15-year-old girls from the island who have older sisters who've been counselors, maybe they're 18 or 19. And because these youngsters who are just 15 or 16 years old have sort of grown up watching normal interactions between so-called able-bodied people and people with disabilities, it just seems like the most natural thing in the world to them. And they fit right into the role of being counselors and laughing and supporting their campers 24 hours a day without any apparent effort. So what I think I'm trying to say is when you see people with disabilities out and about as part of your community, it's much easier to view them as just a natural part of society, a natural part of our community.
Yeah. I've shared here on the podcast many times that I worked in a program that served kids with severe developmental disabilities. And one of the things that I noticed, I was quite very young at that time, that fear that you spoke about was very prevalent. My job was to bring the kids out into the community and find different ways for them to interact with their peers in typical situations. But I know my friends, as they were getting married and starting to have kids, especially anybody who was having a kid, anybody whose wife was pregnant or who was pregnant, they wouldn't speak to me at that time. And I think it was just this fear that I might, because I was working with kids with disabilities, I might be carrying something that they or their kid could catch. And it was really crazy, but it was there. It was very real.
I think it's probably true that the people of Martha's Vineyard maybe felt that way back in 1953. But then over the years, as Camp Jabberwocky traveled the island in a big red school bus with Tweedledee and Tweedledum and other Lewis Carroll characters painted on the side, singing all the time, I think the people of the island slowly realized that they wanted this group of people to be part of their society. They wanted to embrace them into the fabric of their culture. They realized that it would make their society, their community, that much more interesting, that much more inclusive. And now Camp Jabberwocky is very much an icon on the island. And I think people on the island are very, very proud to host that place and to embrace people with disabilities as part of their community. Yeah. So it took a little while. Mm-hmm. It took a little while. But again, just having it out there, having them among us, it became much more of a natural thing to accept people who are different from us. Mm-hmm. And by the way, if we want to get more philosophical about the world at large today, one of the problems we have right now is we're suspicious of people who are different from us. And there's a lot of malice and dissonance going on in the world because of that. And there's probably lessons to be learned at a place like Jabberwocky that could be applied on a larger scale, perhaps.
Yeah. I guess the question I have is, and this has been something that I've been involved with since 1989 in various levels. And I was, very active in pushing to get the Americans with Disabilities Act passed back then, and created a disabilities awareness video that was seen in classrooms around the world. Martha's Vineyard is this beautiful little island, and it is a very unique culture there, and it is its own little culture. And it's wonderful that Jabberwocky has become such a beautiful part of that society. Can we make it, can we replicate what's going on in that little island throughout the rest of the country and the world?
I think the answer is yes. So, when we leave the island at the end of the summer, after our session is over at camp, we get onto one of the big ferries with beautiful names like Katama and Sankaty, and cross the 6 miles of Vineyard Sound and get off in Woods Hole. And we all have the same question in the back of our minds, which is, why can't the real world be more like Camp Jabberwocky? And I think to your question, the answer is yes. So as these people leave, as they return to their homes, wherever they might come from, they carry with them, inside of them, a nugget of Mrs. Lamb's dream from 1953. They carry inside of them, almost as if it's changed their very DNA, a different way that they look at the people around them, a different way that they look at the world and they look at themselves. And it's possible for them to carry that back to the communities they come from. And if more of us do that more often, then it is possible that the real world could eventually become more like Camp Jabberwocky.
Yeah. Just a quick question. I'm wondering, as a medical doctor, was it difficult for you to kind of wrap your mind around this, this feeling of just accepting your son and the other people at Camp Jabberwocky as people? I know one of the difficulties I faced in working with kids with developmental disabilities, and, my job was to get them into the community. The medical people who were working in the hospital that sponsored our school were so protective. I mean, they literally wanted me to have an army of nurses and aides and, everything, parading along with me if I took one kid out in the community, and it was unwielding, and I it just didn't make sense. Was it hard for you as a medical doctor to kind of get out of that overprotective mode that I experienced?
Yeah, it was a little bit at first. Again, going back to Mrs. Lamb, this iconic cantankerous person that started camp. By the way, her nickname sort of tells it all. Her nickname was Hellcat, which referred both to her unwillingness to take no for an answer and her erratic driving habits, going down one-way streets the wrong way. But her philosophy was, hey, just do it. If you want to take a kid to the beach, if you want to take a kid and put him on top of a horse, just do it. Mm-hmm. Back in those days, she didn't worry too much about forms from the Department of Public Health or, dotting every I and crossing every T, which now, unfortunately, we do have to do. We're in a different world today. But so I adopted sort of her philosophy early on that, short of really, losing touch with reality, letting things happen quite naturally was perfectly fine. And the counselors, the kids that were taking care of the campers were quite capable of handling them. And once in a while there was a seizure or something more serious that I needed to help them with. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, they were in good hands, and I recognized that right away.
That's a credit to you. It's true. I mean, I think that was, in my role of trying to bring a kid out and be socialized and have opportunities to develop a friendship with a kid in a typical public school, that's really difficult when that kid has a nurse and all this kind of backup stuff waiting in the background to pounce.
I tell a story in the book called Designated Drivers. So Graham, our son, was put in a mainstream classroom in a town north of Boston called Marblehead. And his classroom teacher had an idea that she thought would be a really good icebreaker on the subject that you're talking about. And so she decided that each day she would assign one or two kids to push Graham around school in his wheelchair to assemblies, to meetings, to recess, everything they did. And she called that role the designated driver. And it turned out that the other kids intuitively wanted that role. The able-bodied kids wanted that role. It wasn't something they were frightened of or thought was repugnant at all. It was quite the opposite. They coveted that job. And so the most charismatic kids in the school, the most popular kids in the school became Graham's designated drivers. So she certainly came up with an idea that broke the ice, that revealed to kids that age that being with someone who's different is nothing to be afraid of. And in fact, being with somebody who's different and assisting them is a sign of strength and something to be honored.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful story. Hats off to that teacher for coming up with that. That's the same experience that we witnessed, that, the kids, and we weren't in Marblehead. We were bringing our kids into some pretty tough inner city schools in Boston, and all of those kids just wanted to be part of our program and to develop friendships. And they developed some beautiful, beautiful friendships. And I think I've told this story on the show, Dr. Stephen, but I'll share it with you. One of those kids that I work with, at that time, 9-year-old girl with severe, with Rett syndrome, which is a degenerative neurological disorder, was responsible for me meeting the woman who became my wife, and we've been married for 30 years since that meeting. And Jennifer was our flower girl at our wedding.
Very nice.
Yes, it was beautiful. Nice. And, that for me is just, I share that just to let people know that when you open up your heart to somebody who is different, wonderful things happen to you. We always think about, oh, I'm doing this good thing for this person. I'm helping this person. And the reality is, as you stated at the beginning of our talk, we're getting so much more out of it. And I certainly, gained a wife and a family because of my work with that program.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Is there one other story before we go from Jabberwocky that you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I'll just say this. I think all of us, whether we're able-bodied or disabled, we all want to belong to something. We all want to belong to something greater than ourselves. To belong to Camp Jabberwocky is an unbelievable gift, both whether you're a camper or whether you're a volunteer there. You become part of a community, part of a family that supports you, maybe argues with you at times, maybe disagrees with you at times, but in the end, embraces you with what has been called Jabberwocky love. Another way of referring to Jabberwocky love that I really like is the phrase, the opposite of loneliness, which was coined by a young author who graduated from Yale, left behind an essay before she died tragically at a young age. In the essay, she tried to describe how wonderful it feels to be part of a group of people who are like-minded, who support one another, who dream together about the future, about possibilities, who tease each other mercilessly sometimes, who keep each other in check, who care deeply about each other, and in the end, who love one another. And in the case of her essay, she wrote it in the context of graduating from college and worrying how she would feel when she no longer was surrounded by this group of individuals that she cared so much about. So she struggled to find the right word for that feeling that she had. And she couldn't think of a single word. So she said, whatever it is, it's the opposite of loneliness. And the opposite of loneliness resonates for me because that's how I feel at Jabberwocky. And I think that's how a lot of the campers and counselors feel at Jabberwocky, to the point where we time our entire year around that 1 month or so, or a few weeks that we can be together at camp. And we look forward to it all year long.
Wow. That's beautiful. The opposite of lonely.
Yeah.
I know that there are a lot of people listening to the show who want to feel that. And I know that they want their kids to feel that too. Tell me, are there ways for folks to volunteer at Camp Jabberwocky?
Indeed, there are. Unfortunately, as you know, this summer is going to be a little different because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So we are going to have camp, which is fantastic. We did not last year for the first time in 68 years. Mm. But we will have camp this year. But the difference will be that there won't be any visitors. Normally, camp loves visitors. So I'd say starting next year, any of your listeners who are interested should simply go there. And they can spend the day there, have a meal with us, maybe stand up and tell an embarrassing story about themselves, which is typically the price of admission. So under normal circumstances, the answer to your question is just come. Mm-hmm. There's a sign on the back of one of the camp vans that I've puzzled over for 25 years. And it says, someone wrote it by hand and then painted over. It says, the best way to explain it is to do it. And I think in this case, what I'm telling you is the best way to explain Camp Jabberwocky is to come and spend a day with us, to be part of it. Unfortunately, this summer might not be the occasion where that's possible. But going forward, I would invite everybody listening to do that.
Yeah. And we definitely want to encourage folks to check out Jabberwocky, a love lesson from a boy who never spoke. I'm guessing that this would be not only a great book and a great audio book for a family to listen to with their teens, but even with their tweens and maybe younger kids too.
I think it is, Jed. There's a troubling part of the story, which is that Graham passes away. Mm-hmm. And so a family would have to be ready and willing to address that topic with their youngsters. But I think obviously it's an important topic for all of us to learn at some point in life. Sooner or later, we all go through it. Mm-hmm. We all lose somebody that we love. And we probably all share some of the same questions when that happens. For example, will I get to see him again? So I think that is a topic that families can and should tackle when the time feels right to them. It's a difficult topic, and you would know better than I what the right age might be to start thinking about a topic like that. But in the end, it's not entirely a sad story. Mm-hmm. And as I started out by saying to you, it's not so much how long he was here, it's the love he spread while he was here that matters. Mm-hmm. Or to paraphrase A.A. Milne, Piglet asked Pooh, how do you spell love? And Pooh said, you don't spell love, you feel it. So I think that's how we experienced our son for 22 years. Unfortunately, we can't lay our hands on him right now, which we would love to do. But he's with us in other ways. He's in our hearts every moment. So that's part of this. That's part of this. The story of this book also is how we grapple with loss and grief, and try to carry on.
Beautiful. Dr. Stephen, where can folks go to find out more about Jabberwocky, maybe find out more about you, and find out more about Camp Jabberwocky?
Thank you for asking that, Jed. So just campjabberwocky.org is a fantastic resource about the camp itself. And then the book that we've been talking about, my book, you simply type in jabberwockybook.com. And lots of fun stuff pops up about the book, including many, many photographs I've taken at the camp over the years and a couple of videos that tell you even more about the story. So jabberwockybook.com or campjabberwocky.org. Those are the best ways to find out more.
We've had a really beautiful time speaking to the author of Jabberwocky, A Love Lesson from a Boy Who Never Spoke. Our guest has been Dr. Stephen Gardner. Hey, Dr. Stephen, thank you so much for sharing time with us today.
Be right back at you, Jim. Thank you so much.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Michelle Nelson Schmidt. She is returning to the show to celebrate her brand new What If Monster series. It's really fun. Michelle is an awesome guest. She's coming back to the show. Can't wait to speak to her. Hey, I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Dr. Stephen Gardner. Be sure to check out Jabberwocky, Love Lessons from a Boy Who Never Spoke. I also want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.